Welcome to Politics News Wolf US channel. The war between Russia and Ukraine continues. The war that started on the morning of February 24 continues despite all the openness and difficult climatic conditions. In the information from the Ukrainian intelligence, it was reported that all the plans of Russian President Vladimir Putin fell through because the Russian people lived like slaves for many years. Russia has neither democratic practices nor resistance experience institute. It was also reported that the Russian state's oil prices are sufficient to ensure that the people do not go hungry. Also, insurgent demonstrators who appeared on the Russian streets roamed the Russian streets chanting anti-stop the war and send the army home. These protests by the demonstrators. Since there is no society there, it is not a protest. It'll be, or rebellion that will eventually end in one way or another. Regime change and reshaping of the Russian Federation itself is said. Citizens of the Russian Federation who oppose Russia's war in Ukraine were invited by activists together in the center of their cities to protest at 7,000 of Russian men or fathers, brothers, and will be thrown into the meat grinder of war. What will they die for? Reportedly today Putin has declared a partial mobilization to send Russian STS to war. In his speech, Putin said that partial mobilization in the 7th month of the war with Ukraine is necessary for the Russian Federation to take care of the homeland. Russia suffered some of the heaviest military losses in a single battle since the start of the war. After early troops repeatedly attempted to attack a fortified coal mining town in broad daylight, digital media reported Ukrainian authorities alleged that large numbers of enemy soldiers were killed, wounded and captured in unsuccessful attempts to seize the Don's hamlet of Fu. They say a 5,000-man naval brigade has been nearly, completely destroyed for a third time since the Kremlin launched a full-scale invasion nearly a year ago. Massacre and loss of at least 100 Turi armored vehicles. It prompted Russian conservatives to call for a public demonstration courts to punish incompetent generals responsible for the repeated massacres of their soldiers on the battlefield. Some are complete idiots. All the mistakes made before were repeated, said Ik, a former Russian intelligence officer who helped stage the pro-Moscow riots in Donetsk and Crimea in 2014. Jokin complained that Russian soldiers were being moved down like turkeys on a shooting range because the Ukrainians held higher positions. The latest attempt to capture Edar began in late January when SPNA Special Forces armored PET and infantry units attacked from various directions. But in an early setback for the Russians, the SPNA commander was killed. The mining town, which used to be home to 14,000 people before the war and sits on an elevated position close to the only rail link between Crimea and Donetsk, was fortified with archery after we stood 3 months of onslaught. The heaviest waves of attacks came last week, leading to a bloodbath of the Marines going. Nazare, spokesman for one of the defending Ukrainian troops, said the Russian advance was easily spotted from high-rise buildings as it made its way through open fields and into the city. We are at the top. They are at the bottom. They are perfectly visible. Seth Tom Cooper, a military historian who studies the war, he describes the Edar as a large high fortress in the middle of an empty, flat desert. The defeat came days after Kremlin, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, boasted of a successful attack near Wolf-Leder. The key Minister of Defense responded by releasing a video showing the destruction of a Russian military column in the Ukrainian military drones filmed Russian tanks entering minefields, bombs dropped on armored vehicles, soldiers wandering in panic and corpses of soldiers scattered on the ground. This isn't even Russian rule anymore. It's like the seasonal suicide of lemmings, commanded a Ukrainian military analysts. Despite Russian President Vladimir Putin's insistence that the Marines worked as they should, Ukrainian officials said some of the worst casualties were inflicted by the 155th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet, one of Russia's most elite Marines stationed in Vladivostok. Says the 155th became famous for looting around Kiev last year and has been dubbed Russia's unhappiest unit after suffering heavy losses in the failed attack on the capital and also in an attack in Ula. 3 months ago, the 155th Brigade had to be reassigned 3 times, said a spokesman for the Ukrainian military, and now almost entire brigade has been after losing 300 in 4 days, attacking a village near Ed. Last November, the surviving CRE Bells wrote a letter blaming the Eastern commander, Lieutenant General Rustam Murdo, for their losses. Now Murdo, a close ally of Moscow's military chief General Val Garmo, is being blamed again for its latest fico by staunch military bloggers and media outlets. Close to Yevgeny, the boss of the brutal Wagner mercenary. A social media channel affiliated with Wagner trade of murder with assassination after calling him sister as he's sitting in the command post in Wolflar and sending the column to column into barrel. Another prominent blogger with 500,000 followers called for public lawsuit suits to be filed to punish officers, especially high-ranking officers who repeatedly failed on the battlefield. More sober analysts in Moscow denounced a movement of tanks and armored vehicles within range of Fuss artillery, saying commanders failed to liaise with intelligence officer. Ukraine believes that by the next month, Putin has ordered his troops, about half of which is currently under Kremlin control, to completely occupy the Don region in anticipation of an impending attack. But the AL has prompted Kiev to believe that Moscow has failed to heal divisions among top commanders and overcome chronic tactical failures seen last year. This is a serious setback with huge losses from one, said Alexander Oke, head of the Center for Defense Reforms in. If they continue to use their troops in this way, it could lead to the collapse of the Russian military forces during the unsated major offensive. Art is 100 miles from the town of Bemua, which has been at the center of the war's fiercest fighting for several months. Both sides suffered heavy losses here after Rory, large numbers of enlisted soldiers and prisoners into the meat grinder. Ukraine says Russian soldiers died this month at the highest numbers since the start of war, with an average of 824 deaths per day, 4 times the rate seen last summer. The British Minister of Defence confirmed the figure was probably correct, saying the increase in casualties at places like B was probably due to a number of factors, including a lack of trained personnel, coordination and resources at the front. The minister said fleeing Russian troops had abandoned at least 30 armed vehicles, most intact, in a single incident following a failed attack in Edar, but had made little progress on the western end of the town. Ukrainian analysts feared that aside from the lack of longer-range weapons supplied by the West, they will not be able to fill the front lines with shells and anti-tank missiles quickly enough, for now's high ground is holding the Russians back. Thank you for watching the video. If you find it useful, please comment and share the video for us. It will make our channel more known. See you in the following videos. Thank you very much.